The rain hammered against the pawn shop window as Melissa Crawford clutched her wedding ring, her hands trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Inside her worn purse lay a crumpled grocery list with just one item: milk for her 3-year-old daughter. What she didn't know was that the man about to walk through that door would change everything. The same man who had walked out of her life 7 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Melissa had been standing outside Romano's pawn shop for 20 minutes, watching the neon sign flicker in the October drizzle. The ring felt heavier with each passing moment, its small diamond catching what little light filtered through the gray Seattle afternoon. She'd bought it herself 3 years ago, not because anyone had proposed, but because she'd wanted something beautiful to wear during her wedding to David, something that made her feel worthy of the moment. Now David was gone, along with their joint bank account, their shared dreams, and most importantly, their stability. He'd left on a Tuesday morning in September, taking their car and leaving behind nothing but divorce papers and a mountain of debt she never knew existed. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was explaining to their daughter Emma why Daddy wouldn't be coming home anymore. The bell above the door chimed as she finally stepped inside. The shop smelled of old leather and cigarette smoke, its walls lined with guitars, tools, and jewelry that told 1,000 different stories of desperation. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with kind eyes, his name tag reading Tony Romano. "What can I do for you today, miss?" His voice carried the gentle tone of someone who'd seen countless people in her exact situation. Melissa's throat felt dry as she approached the counter. "I need to sell this." She placed the ring on the glass surface, its modest diamond seeming even smaller under the harsh fluorescent lights. Tony picked up a jeweler's loupe and examined the ring carefully. "It's a nice piece. Clean stone, good setting. You're sure about this?" She nodded, though her chest felt tight. "My daughter needs milk and food, and I don't have any other options left." The old man's expression softened. "Times are tough all over. I see it every day." He set the ring down gently. "This is worth about $400. I can give you $250 for it." $250. It would cover groceries for a month, maybe 2 if she was careful. It would buy Emma the milk she needed, the bread for sandwiches, the peanut butter that had become their staple dinner. It wasn't enough to solve their problems, but it was enough to survive a little longer. "That works," she whispered Dot as Tony began preparing the paperwork. The bell chimed again. Melissa didn't turn around, too focused on signing away the last reminder of her failed marriage. She heard footsteps behind her, someone browsing the aisles, but paid no attention until a familiar voice cut through the shop's quiet atmosphere. "Excuse me, do you have any vintage watches in stock?" Her pen froze mid-signature. That voice, deeper now, more confident than she remembered, but unmistakably him. 7 years hadn't erased the way he pronounced his words, the slight upturn at the end of his sentences. Her heart began racing as she turned around slowly. Marcus Webb stood near a display case of electronics, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than she'd earned in the past 6 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he'd filled out since college, broader shoulders, more defined features. Everything about him screamed success, from his Italian leather shoes to the silver watch glinting on his wrist. Their eyes met across the cramped shop, and time seemed to suspend itself. His confident expression faltered, replaced by something she couldn't quite read: surprise. Certainly, but something deeper, something that looked almost like pain. "Melissa?" His voice was barely above a whisper. She couldn't find her voice. Standing there in her faded jeans and second-hand sweater, rain still dripping from her hair, she felt every inch of the distance that 7 years had created between them. This wasn't how she'd imagined seeing him again. In her fantasies, the ones she'd never admit to having, She was successful, happy, proving that letting her go had been his mistake. Marcus. She managed to get his name out, though it felt strange on her tongue after so long. Tony looked between them, sensing the tension but clearly not understanding its source. You two know each other? Marcus took a step closer, his eyes never leaving her face. We went to college together. It was a massive understatement. They'd done much more than attend the same university. They'd shared 2 years of their lives, making plans for a future that had crumbled the night before graduation. I'll just finish up your paperwork, Tony said diplomatically, returning to his forms. The silence stretched between them, filled with 7 years of unspoken words. Marcus glanced down at the ring on the counter, then back at her face. She watched recognition dawn in his eyes, not of the ring itself, but of what its presence on that counter meant. How have you been? The question sounded hollow even to her own ears, but she didn't know what else to say. Good, really good. He straightened his tie, a nervous habit she remembered from their college days. I started a tech company a few years back. We just went public last month. Of course he had. Marcus had always been brilliant, the kind of person who seemed destined for success. Even in college, while other students were focused on parties and exams, he'd been sketching out business plans and talking about changing the world. She'd believed in him then, had seen the potential that everyone else missed. That's amazing, she said, and meant it, despite the bitter irony of the moment. What about you? Are you still doing graphic design? The question hit harder than she'd expected. After David left, she'd been forced to take whatever work she could find. Waitressing, cleaning houses, data entry, anything that would pay the bills and let her be home with Emma in the evenings. Her design portfolio gathered dust in a closet, along with all the other dreams she'd put on hold. I'm between projects right now, she said, which was technically true if you considered that she'd been between the same 2 projects for the past 8 months. Marcus nodded, but she could see him processing her appearance, the circumstances that had brought her to this pawn shop. He'd always been perceptive, able to read people in ways that sometimes made her uncomfortable. It was part of what had made him such a good businessman, but right now she wished he couldn't see through her so easily. All set, Tony announced, sliding the paperwork across the counter. Just need your signature here and here. Melissa stared at the forms, the reality of what she was doing crashing over her again. This ring represented the last piece of the life she'd tried to build after Marcus left. Selling it felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that every choice she'd made since college had been wrong. Her hand hovered over the paper, pen trembling slightly. She could feel Marcus watching her, could sense his questions even though he wasn't asking them. The shop felt smaller with him in it, the walls closing in as the weight of their shared history pressed down on her. Actually, Marcus said suddenly, his voice cutting through her hesitation, I'd like to buy that ring. Both Melissa and Tony turned to stare at him. He walked over to the counter, pulling out a wallet that looked like it cost more than her monthly rent. It's exactly what I've been looking for, he continued, though his eyes remained fixed on Melissa's face rather than the ring. How much were you asking? Tony glanced between them again, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. Well, I was going to give the lady $250 for it, so I'd need to ask at least $400 to make it worth my while. I'll give you $1,000, Marcus said without hesitation. Melissa's breath caught. Marcus, no. You don't need to. It's perfect, he interrupted, pulling out a stack of bills that made Tony's eyes widen. Exactly what I've been looking for. She knew he was lying. The ring was modest, nothing that would appeal to someone who could clearly afford much better. But there was something in his expression, a determination that she remembered from their college days when he'd set his mind on something. Tony looked at the cash, then at Melissa. Miss, it's your ring. If you want to sell it to him, instead ... the money would solve so many problems. $1,000 would buy groceries for months, would let her catch up on the electric bill, might even cover Emma's daycare so she could look for better work. But taking money from Marcus felt wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. "Why?" she asked quietly. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Because some things are worth more than their asking price." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that went far beyond the simple transaction. She thought about Emma at home with Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor who watched her for free because she knew Melissa couldn't afford real childcare. She thought about the empty refrigerator, the overdue bills, the constant worry that kept her awake at night. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Okay," she whispered. Marcus handed the money to Tony, who counted it twice before sliding it across to Melissa. Her fingers brushed against the bills, more money than she'd held in months. It felt surreal, like a dream that might evaporate if she moved too quickly. "Thank you," she managed to say, though the words felt inadequate. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus picked up the ring, turning it over in his palm. For a moment, his confident facade cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "It really is beautiful," he said softly. The rain had intensified while they'd been inside, turning the street into a river of rushing water. Melissa stood in the doorway, watching Marcus walk toward a sleek black Tesla parked at the curb. The contrast between his car and her bus pass felt like a chasm she could never cross. He stopped at his car door and turned back. "Melissa?" She looked up, rain already beginning to soak through her thin jacket. "If you ever need anything... He trailed off, seeming to realize how patronizing it might sound. "I mean, if you'd like to catch up sometime, for coffee or something." Part of her wanted to say yes, to pretend that 7 years hadn't happened, that they could simply pick up where they'd left off. But she knew better. The boy she'd loved in college was gone, replaced by this successful stranger who could casually spend $1,000 on a ring he didn't want. And the girl he'd known was gone too, replaced by a single mother whose biggest concern was having enough milk for her daughter's cereal. "I should get home," she said instead. "Emma's waiting." "Emma, my daughter." "She's 3. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe disappointment. She realized he'd been calculating the timeline, figuring out that Emma had been born well after their breakup. "She's beautiful, I'm sure," he said quietly. "She is." Despite everything, Melissa found herself smiling. "She's the best thing that's ever happened to me." Marcus nodded, though she caught something wistful in his expression. "I'm glad you found happiness." The words felt like a goodbye, final in a way that their actual goodbyes 7 years ago hadn't been. That night had been full of anger and hurt. Feelings, promises to stay in touch that they'd both known were lies. This felt different, sadder, but somehow more honest. "Take care of yourself, Marcus. You too, Mel." He hadn't called her Mel since college. The nickname hit her unexpectedly, bringing back memories of late nights in the library, weekend drives to nowhere, the way he used to trace patterns on her back while she fell asleep. For a moment, she could almost pretend they were 21. Again, that the choices they'd made hadn't led them to this rain-soaked street, where they stood as strangers. Then he got in his car and drove away, leaving her standing alone with $1,000 and more questions than answers. The bus ride home gave her time to think, though she wasn't sure she wanted to. The money in her purse felt both like salvation and like something she hadn't earned. She'd solved her immediate problems, but at what cost? Taking charity from her ex-boyfriend felt like admitting that she'd failed at the life she'd tried to build without him. But as the bus pulled up to her stop, she thought about Emma waiting at home, probably asking Mrs. Patterson for the 100th time when Mommy would be back. She thought about being able to buy milk without counting coins, about having enough food in the refrigerator, that Emma wouldn't have to go to bed hungry. Maybe pride was overrated after all. Mrs. Patterson's apartment Smelled like cinnamon and old books. Emma was on the floor with a coloring book, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she carefully stayed within the lines. At 3, she was already showing signs of the perfectionism that Melissa recognized from her own childhood. "Mommy!" Emma dropped her crayon and ran over, wrapping her small arms around Melissa's legs. "I missed you." "I missed you too, baby." Melissa knelt down and pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. This was what mattered, not Marcus's success or her own failures, but this perfect little person who loved her unconditionally. "Did you get milk?" Emma asked hopefully. "I did, and lots of other good stuff too." Emma's eyes lit up. "Can we have pancakes for dinner? We can have whatever you want for dinner." As they walked the 2 blocks to their small apartment, Emma chattered about her day, the picture she'd drawn, the story Mrs. Patterson had read to her, the cat she'd seen in the alley behind their building. Her innocence was both heartbreaking and inspiring. She had no idea how close they'd come to having nothing, how the $1,000 in Melissa's purse represented the difference between surviving and falling apart completely. Their apartment was tiny, just 1 bedroom, a living room that doubled as Melissa's bedroom, and a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people. But it was theirs, and Emma had made it home with her drawings taped to the refrigerator and her toys scattered across the worn carpet. While Emma played with her blocks, Melissa sat at their small table and counted the money again. $1,000. After rent, utilities, and childcare, she'd have enough left over for groceries and maybe even some new clothes for Emma, who was outgrowing everything at an alarming rate. But she couldn't stop thinking about Marcus, about the way he'd looked at her in that pawn shop. There had been something in his eyes, not pity, exactly, but a kind of sadness that she didn't understand. Did he regret the way things had ended between them? Did he ever wonder what might have been if they'd made different choices? The questions were pointless, she knew. Whatever they'd had was over, had been over for 7 years. He'd moved on, built an empire, become the success she'd always known he could be. She'd moved on too, in her own way, even if her path had been rockier than she'd expected. But as she tucked Emma into bed that night, reading from a library book about a princess who saved herself, she couldn't shake the feeling that seeing Marcus again had changed something. Not everything her life was still the same, her problems still real, but something fundamental had shifted. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was just the relief of knowing that she could buy groceries tomorrow without calculating every penny. Either way, for the first time in months, she fell asleep without worrying about what the next day would bring. She had no way of knowing that across the city, Marcus Webb sat in his penthouse office, turning her wedding ring over in his hands, and wondering if some chances were worth taking. Even 7 years too late. 3 days passed before Melissa saw Marcus again, though she'd thought about him constantly. The money from the ring had transformed their small apartment. The refrigerator was full for the first time in months. Emma had new shoes that actually fit, and there was even enough left over for a small emergency fund. But every time she looked at her bare ring finger, she felt a complex mix of relief and loss. She was leaving Emma's daycare on Thursday morning when she spotted the familiar black Tesla parked across the street. Marcus leaned against the driver's side, looking oddly out of place in the working-class neighborhood with his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair. He was reading something on his phone, seemingly oblivious to the curious stares from other parents dropping off their children. Melissa's first instinct was to avoid him, to slip around the corner and take the long way to the bus stop. But Emma had already noticed the sleek car and was tugging on her mother's hand. "Mommy, look at that pretty car. It's like the ones in my picture books." Marcus looked up at the sound of Emma's voice, and his gaze found Melissa immediately. He straightened up, shoving his phone into his pocket with the nervous energy she remembered from their college days when he was about to ask her something important. "Melissa," he called out, crossing the street with confident strides. I was hoping I'd catch you. Emma pressed closer to her mother's side, suddenly shy in the presence of this tall stranger. She'd been wary of men since David left, and Melissa couldn't blame her. The few dates she'd attempted over the past year had been disasters, partly because Emma seemed to have developed a sixth sense about her mother's anxiety around new people. "This is Emma," Melissa said, placing a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Emma, this is Marcus. He's an old friend of Mommy's." Marcus crouched down to Emma's eye level, his expression softening in a way that surprised Melissa. "Hi. Emma, I like your backpack. Is that a unicorn?" Emma nodded solemnly, her grip on Melissa's hand loosening slightly. "Her name is Sparkles. She's magic. I bet she is." "Magic is very important." Marcus glanced up at Melissa, then back at Emma. "I was wondering if you and your mom might like to get some breakfast. I know a place that makes the best pancakes in Seattle." "We already ate," Melissa said quickly, though Emma's eyes had lit up at the mention of pancakes. "Actually," Emma said, her shyness momentarily forgotten, "we only had cereal. And I love pancakes." Marcus smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression Melissa had seen from him. "What do you say, Mom? My treat." Melissa felt trapped between her daughter's hopeful expression and her own complicated feelings about accepting more help from Marcus. The rational part of her brain pointed out that one breakfast wouldn't hurt, that Emma deserved treats like restaurant pancakes. But another part of her wondered what Marcus really wanted, why he'd been waiting outside Emma's daycare. "Please, Mommy." Emma's voice carried that particular tone that 3-year-olds had perfected, the one that made it impossible to say no. "Okay," Melissa said reluctantly. "But just for a little while." The restaurant Marcus chose was nothing like the upscale places she'd imagined he frequented. Murphy's Diner was a classic breakfast spot tucked between a hardware store and a used bookshop, the kind of place that had been serving the same menu for decades. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, and the air smelled like bacon and coffee. Emma was fascinated by everything. The jukebox in the corner, the pie case by the register, the way their waitress called everyone honey. She chartered nonstop, telling Marcus about her favorite cartoons, her stuffed animals, and the elaborate stories she made up about the pigeons that lived on their fire escape. Marcus listened with genuine interest, asking questions and laughing at Emma's 3-year-old logic. Watching them together stirred something complicated in Melissa's chest. David had never been this patient with Emma, had always seemed to view their daughter as an interruption to his own plans. "So you're in the computer business?" Emma asked seriously, syrup dripping from her fork. "Something like that," Marcus said. "I help make apps for phones and tablets." "Like games?" "Some games, yes. But also apps that help people do their jobs better or stay in touch with their families." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Mommy used to make pictures on the computer. Pretty ones." Melissa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Emma, eat your pancakes." But Marcus was looking at her with interest. "You still do graphic design?" "Not really, not for a while now." She focused on cutting Emma's pancakes into smaller pieces, avoiding his gaze. "She made me a birthday card with a unicorn on it," Emma continued proudly. "It was the most beautiful card ever." "I bet it was," Marcus said softly, his eyes still on Melissa. After breakfast, Marcus walked them to the bus stop. Emma skipped ahead, full of pancakes and excitement, while Melissa struggled with the awkwardness of the situation. She didn't understand what Marcus wanted from her, why he was being so kind. In college, his gestures had always been straightforward flowers. Because he liked her, late-night study sessions because they had exams, road trips because they both needed to get away from campus. This felt different, more complicated. "Thank you for breakfast," she said as they reached the stop. "Emma had a great time." "So did I," Marcus paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Melissa, can I ask you something?" Her stomach tightened. What? Why didn't you tell me about Emma's father? When we were in the pawn shop, the question caught her off guard. She'd been expecting him to ask about her work, her living situation, anything but David. It didn't seem relevant. Didn't seem relevant? Marcus's voice carried a note of something she couldn't identify. You're married, Melissa, or were married. That seems pretty relevant to me. Divorced, she corrected automatically. He left. U.S. in September. Marcus's expression shifted, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. The timeline suddenly made sense to him, her presence in the pawn shop, the desperate sale of her wedding ring, the way she'd looked when he'd found her there. I'm sorry, he said quietly. That must have been incredibly difficult. Melissa felt. Tears threatened and blinked them back. She'd spent months building walls around her emotions, learning to compartmentalize her pain so she could function for Emma's sake. Having someone acknowledge how hard it had been threatened to break down. Those carefully constructed barriers. We're managing, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The bus rounded the corner, its brakes squealing as it approached their stop. Emma ran back to them, grabbing Melissa's hand. Can we see Marcus again soon? She asked hopefully. Melissa opened her mouth to give a non-committal answer, but Marcus spoke first. I'd like that very much, he said, looking directly at Melissa. Maybe we could do something fun this weekend. The zoo or the aquarium. The aquarium, Emma bounced on her toes. They have sharks. Melissa felt cornered again, caught between Emma's enthusiasm and her own reservations. But looking at her daughter's bright face, she couldn't bring herself to disappoint her. Saturday afternoon, she found herself saying. If you're sure. I'm sure, Marcus said, and something in his tone made her believe him. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Melissa sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea and tried to make sense of what was happening. Why was Marcus suddenly back in her life? What did he want from her? And more importantly, what did she want from him? She'd loved him once, completely and without reservation. They'd been inseparable in college, the couple that everyone assumed would get married right after graduation. They'd talked about it sometimes. Lying in his dorm room bed after midnight, making plans for a future that had seemed inevitable. But then came the job offer from the tech company in Silicon Valley. The opportunity that would launch Marcus's career, but require him to move across the country. She'd been accepted to graduate school in Chicago, a chance to continue her art and design studies. They'd tried to make it work long distance for exactly 3 months before everything fell apart in a series of increasingly bitter phone calls. The breakup had been brutal. She'd accused him of choosing his career over their relationship, of never really loving her enough to fight for them. He'd accused her of being selfish, of not understanding what the job meant for his future. They'd both said things they couldn't take back, and by Christmas of their senior year, they'd stopped speaking entirely. Now here he was, 7 years later, offering to take her daughter to the aquarium like it was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't understand his motivations, but she couldn't deny that seeing him again had awakened feelings she'd thought were long buried. Her phone buzzed with a text message, startling her out of her thoughts. She didn't recognize the number, but the message was brief. Thank you for letting me spend time with you and Emma today. She's incredible. You should be proud. Melissa stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, thank you for breakfast. Emma hasn't stopped talking about the pancakes. His response came quickly. Looking forward to Saturday. Sleep well, Mel. There was that nickname again, the one that made her feel like she was 21 and anything was possible. She set the phone down and finished her tea, trying not to think about what Saturday might bring. The Seattle Aquarium was crowded with families, school groups and tourists, but Emma was in her element. She pressed her face against every tank, gasping with delight at each new creature. Marcus proved to be an excellent tour guide. reading the information plaques aloud and making up stories about the fish that had Emma giggling uncontrollably. "This one is Harold," he said, pointing to a particularly grumpy-looking grouper. "He's upset because he forgot to brush his teeth this morning. Fish don't brush their teeth." Emma protested through her laughter. "How do you know? Have you ever asked one?" Melissa found herself relaxing despite her initial nervousness. Marcus was good with Emma, patient and playful in a way that felt natural rather than forced. He didn't talk down to her or dismiss her questions, treating her 3-year-old observations with the same seriousness he might give to a business presentation. In the shark tunnel, Emma grew quiet, awed by the massive creature swimming overhead. She stood between Melissa and Marcus, holding both their hands, her neck craned back to watch the sharks glide through the water. "Are they scary?" she whispered. "They're powerful," Marcus said thoughtfully. "But they're not trying to be scary. They're just doing what sharks do, swimming, hunting, being themselves. Like how I'm just being, Emma. Exactly like that." Melissa felt something shift inside her chest, watching Marcus with her daughter. This was a side of him she'd never seen in college, a gentleness that surprised her. The Marcus she'd known had been driven and ambitious, always focused on the next goal, the next achievement. This version seemed more grounded, more present. After the aquarium, they walked through Pike Place Market, Emma's eyes wide at the fish vendors and flower stalls. Marcus bought her a small bouquet of daisies and a salmon-shaped cookie that was almost too pretty to eat. Melissa protested the gifts, but he waved off her concerns. "It's not charity," he said quietly while Emma was distracted by a street musician. "It's just ... I like seeing her happy, and you are happy." "Marcus," she stopped walking, forcing him to turn and face her. "What is this? What are we doing?" He was quiet for a moment, watching Emma dance to the musician's guitar. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "I just know that seeing you again made me realize how much I've missed having people in my life who actually matter. You must have people. Friends, colleagues, someone you're dating. I have employees. I have business partners. I have people who want things from me." His voice carried a weariness she hadn't noticed before. "But I don't have people who care about me for who I am, not what I can do for them." Melissa studied his profile, seeing past the expensive suit and confident exterior to something vulnerable underneath. Success, it seemed, had come with its own kind of loneliness. "That's not what this is," she said firmly. "I don't want anything from you." "I know. That's what makes it so ... double quotes he trailed off, seeming to search for the right word. "Precious, I guess." Emma ran back to them, breathless and excited. "Can we get ice cream, please?" They found a small gelato shop with outdoor seating, and Emma worked seriously on a cone of strawberry ice cream while Melissa and Marcus talked about safer topics, books they'd read, movies they'd enjoyed, changes in the city since they'd been gone. It felt almost normal, like they were just old friends catching up. But underneath the casual conversation, Melissa sensed deeper currents. The way Marcus looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The careful way he avoided mentioning his wealth or success. The way he'd made himself available for an entire Saturday afternoon. As if he had nothing more important to do. As they prepared to leave, Emma threw herself into Marcus's arms for a hug, her small body trusting in a way that made Melissa's throat tight. "Thank you for the best day ever," Emma said solemnly. "Thank you for showing me the sharks," Marcus replied, equally serious. On the bus ride home, Emma fell asleep against Melissa's shoulder, exhausted from the day's adventures. Melissa watched the city roll past the windows and wondered what she was getting herself into. Marcus had been part of her past, a chapter she'd thought was closed forever. But now he was becoming part of Emma's present, and she wasn't sure how. She felt about that. Her phone buzzed with another text. "Emma is lucky to have you as a mom. You're doing an amazing job." This time, she didn't respond right away. Instead, she held the phone in her lap and wondered if it was possible to go backward in life, to reclaim something you'd lost years ago. Or if some doors, once closed, were meant to stay that way. But as she tucked Emma into bed that night and listened to her daughter's sleepy recap of their day, the sharks, the flowers, the nice man who bought her ice cream, Melissa couldn't deny that something had changed. For the first time since David left, she felt like they weren't alone in the world. Whether that was a good thing or a dangerous thing remained to be seen. The following Tuesday brought an unexpected phone call that would change everything. Melissa was folding laundry in her living room while Emma napped when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Crawford? This is Jennifer Walsh from Beacon Elementary School. I'm calling about Emma's enrollment for next fall." Melissa's heart sank. She'd been dreading this conversation, knowing that Emma would need to start preschool soon, but having no idea how to afford it. The public programs had waiting lists stretching into next year, and private options were completely out of reach. "I'm sorry," Melissa said, sinking onto her couch. "I'm still working on the financial aspects. Can I call you back?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling. Someone has paid Emma's tuition for the entire year, including supplies and lunch fees. Everything's been taken care of." Melissa felt the room spin slightly. "I'm sorry, what? Who would do that?" The donor requested anonymity, but they specified that Emma Crawford was to receive a full scholarship. "Is there any reason you'd refuse this gift?" "I know, Melissa struggled to find words. "Are you sure this isn't a mistake?" "No mistake. Emma's spot is secured whenever you're ready to complete the enrollment paperwork." After hanging up, Melissa stared at her phone for a long moment. There was only one person who could have done this, only one person who knew about Emma's need for school and had the resources to make it happen. But why would Marcus do something so significant without asking her first? Her phone rang again almost immediately. "Before you get angry," Marcus's voice said without preamble, "hear me out." "How did you?" she started, then shook her head. "Marcus, you can't just pay for Emma's education without asking me. Can we meet? There's something I need to tell you, and it's not a phone conversation." An hour later, they sat in a quiet coffee shop in Fremont, Emma playing with coloring books. At a corner table while Melissa waited for Marcus to explain himself. He looked different today, less polished, more uncertain. His usual confidence seemed strained. "I've been thinking about us," he began, then caught himself. "About you and Emma, about what happened 7 years ago." "Marcus, that was a long time ago. We were different people." "Were we?" He leaned forward, his voice intense. "Because I've been successful, Melissa. Really successful. I've built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I have houses, cars, investments, everything I thought I wanted when we were in college." "That's wonderful. I'm happy for you. But I'm not happy." The words came out in a rush. "I haven't been happy since the day I let you walk away." Melissa felt her pulse quicken. "Marcus, don't." "I made the wrong choice," he continued, his voice raw with emotion. "I chose ambition over love, and I've regretted it every single day for 7 years. When I saw you in that pawn shop, desperate enough to sell your wedding ring just to buy milk for your daughter, I realized how badly I'd failed. You didn't fail me. We were young, we wanted different things. I wanted you." His voice rose, causing other customers to glance their way. He lowered it immediately, glancing at Emma to make sure she hadn't been disturbed. "I wanted you. But I was too proud to admit that my career meant nothing without someone to share it with." Melissa felt tears threatening. "Marcus, please, this isn't fair." "What isn't fair is that you're struggling to provide for Emma while I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. What isn't fair is that you're working jobs that don't use your talents well. I have a company that desperately needs good designers." "So this is charity? You feel guilty about how your life turned out versus mine?" "No, His voice was firm now, certain. "This is me trying to fix the biggest mistake I ever made." Emma looked up from her coloring book, sensing the tension even. If she couldn't understand it, "Mommy, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Melissa managed, forcing a smile. Marcus watched Emma return to her coloring, and his expression softened. "She's remarkable, you know. Smart, funny, kind just like her mother." "Marcus, stop. I know I have no right to ask this, but will you let me help? Not because you need it, but because I need to. Because making sure you and Emma are okay is the only thing that's made me feel human in years." Melissa stared at him, trying to process everything he'd said. The Marcus she'd known in college had been ambitious, but never vulnerable like this. Success had changed him, but maybe not in the ways she'd expected. "The school thing," she said quietly. "That was way over the line." "I know. I'm sorry. When you mentioned that Emma would need preschool soon, I wanted to make sure it happened. I didn't think about how it would make you feel. Like a charity case. Like someone who can't take care of her own child." Marcus winced. "That wasn't my intention, but that's the reality, isn't it? You're the successful billionaire, and I'm the struggling single mother who can't even afford preschool. You're the woman I never stopped loving," he said quietly, and the words hit her like a physical blow. Melissa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Emma, time to go." "But I'm not done coloring. You can finish at home." Her voice was shakier than she'd intended. Marcus stood too, reaching for her arm. "Melissa, please, don't run away again." "I'm not running away. I'm protecting my daughter from getting attached to someone who might disappear. I'm not going anywhere. You did before." The words hung between them, heavy with 7 years of hurt and regret. Marcus's face went pale, and for a moment he looked exactly like the 21-year-old boy who'd chosen his career over their relationship. "That was different," he said weakly. "Was it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to buy your way back into our lives. And when the novelty wears off, you'll move on to the next thing that catches your attention." Emma tugged on Melissa's hand. "Mommy, why are you sad?" Melissa knelt down to Emma's level, forcing another smile. "I'm not sad, baby, just tired. Let's go home." As they left the coffee shop, Melissa heard Marcus call her name, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't handle any more emotional revelations, couldn't process the implications of what he'd said. A confession that he'd never stopped loving. Her felt too big, too complicated for her current life. On the bus ride home, Emma was unusually quiet, sensing her mother's distress. Finally she spoke up. "Is Marcus in trouble?" "No, sweetheart. Marcus isn't in trouble." "Then why can't we see him anymore?" Melissa realized she'd never actually said they couldn't see Marcus anymore, but Emma had picked up on the tension. Her daughter was more perceptive than she'd given her credit for. "It's complicated, Em. Because he's a grown-up and grown-ups are complicated." Despite everything, Melissa found herself smiling. Something like that. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Melissa found herself walking to the small balcony of their apartment. The city stretched out below her, lights twinkling like stars. She thought about Marcus's confession, about the pain in his voice when he'd said he'd never stopped loving her. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to think that their love story could have a second chance. But she'd learned the hard way that love wasn't enough to overcome fundamental differences. She'd loved David too, and look how that had ended. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "I'm sorry. I know I handled everything wrong, but I meant what I said. All of it." She stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "I need time to think. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." 3 days passed without contact, though Melissa found herself thinking about Marcus constantly. Emma asked about him twice, wondering when they'd see him again, and each time Melissa deflected with vague promises of soon. On Friday afternoon, she was picking Emma up from Mrs. Patterson's when her phone rang. This time, it was a number she recognized, her former boss from the design firm where she'd worked before Emma was born. "Melissa? This is Robert Chun from Chun Creative. Do you have a minute to talk?" "Of course." She stepped away from Emma and Mrs. Patterson, curious why Robert would be calling after all this time. "I have an interesting proposition for you. We've been approached by a tech company looking for freelance design work, rebranding, website overhaul, the whole package. It's a 6-month contract, very well paid, and the client specifically requested you." Melissa's stomach dropped. "What's the name of the company?" "Web Technologies. The CEO said he'd worked with you before and was impressed with your portfolio." She closed her eyes, feeling manipulated and grateful in equal measure. This was exactly what she needed: work in her field, good pay, a chance to rebuild her career. It was also Marcus pulling strings again, trying to fix her life without her permission. "Melissa, are you there?" "I'm here." "Can I think about it over the weekend?" "Of course. But I should mention the rate they're offering is exceptional. $20,000 for the 6-month project, with the possibility of extension. $20,000. More than she'd made in the past year combined. Enough to move to a better apartment, to give Emma stability, to start building a real future instead of just surviving day to day. "I'll call you Monday," she managed out after. Hanging up, she stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching Emma chase pigeons in Mrs. Patterson's small garden. Her daughter deserved better than their current life, deserved opportunities and stability, and a mother who wasn't constantly stressed about money, but accepting Marcus's help because that's what this was, no matter how he'd disguised it. Felt like admitting defeat. It felt like acknowledging that she couldn't make it on her own. That evening, she made a decision. She called Marcus directly. "We need to talk," she said when he answered. "Okay. When and where?" "Tomorrow afternoon. The park on Pine Street, after Emma's nap." "And Marcus?" "No more surprises. No more paying for things without asking. No more job offers through intermediaries. If we're going to figure this out, we need to be honest with each other." "Agreed," he said quietly. "Melissa? What? Thank you for giving me another chance." "I haven't given you anything yet," she said, but her voice lacked the anger it had carried earlier in the week. Saturday afternoon found them sitting on a bench while Emma played on the nearby playground. The autumn air was crisp, leaves falling around them in shades of gold and red. It felt like a setting for important conversations, for decisions that would change everything. "The job offer," Melissa began without preamble. "That was you." "Yes. Why?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching Emma navigate the monkey bars with determined concentration. "Because you're talented, and talent shouldn't go to waste. Because I remember the designs you created in college, how passionate you were about your work. Because I thought maybe you'd want the chance to do what you love again. And if I say no, then you say no. The offer stands regardless of what happens between us personally." Melissa studied his profile, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas. But all she saw was the boy she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago, older and more successful, but somehow more vulnerable too. "I want to accept the job," she said finally, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "This is business. Professional rates, professional deadlines, professional boundaries. Whatever happens between us personally stays separate from the work." "Agreed." "And no more surprise gifts for Emma. No more paying for things without asking. Me first. If you want to help, you ask. And you accept it when I say no." "Understood." Melissa took a deep breath. "And I want to know why you really came back into our lives. The truth, not the romantic version." Marcus turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "The truth is that I've spent 7 years building an empire that doesn't mean anything because I have no one to share it with. The truth is that I wake up every morning in a penthouse apartment, that feels like a prison. The truth is that success means nothing when you're completely alone." He paused, his voice growing softer. "But mostly, the truth is that I never forgave myself for letting you go. And when I saw you in that pawn shop, desperate and struggling, I realized that all my success meant nothing if I couldn't use it to help the people I care about. And Emma? Emma is incredible. She's smart and funny, and she sees the world in ways that remind me why life is worth living. But Melissa, I didn't come back for Emma. I came back for you." Emma's laughter carried across the playground as she conquered a particularly challenging climbing structure. Melissa watched her daughter, thinking about the choices that had led them to this moment. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" "Of trusting you again. Of letting Emma get attached to you. Of believing that this time might be different." Marcus reached over and took her hand, the first time he'd touched her since that day in the pawn shop. His skin was warm, familiar in ways that made her heart ache. "I'm scared too," he said. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." Melissa looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. In his eyes, she saw the same love she remembered from college, but deeper now, more mature. The boy who'd chosen ambition over love had become a man who understood what really mattered. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, what?" "Okay, let's try. Slowly, carefully, but let's try." Marcus's smile was brighter than the autumn sun, and for the first time in 7 years, Melissa allowed herself to hope that some stories really did get second chances. 2 weeks into the design project, Melissa found herself genuinely excited about work for the first time in years. Web Technologies' offices occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering stunning views of Elliott Bay. Her temporary workspace was a far cry from her kitchen table, equipped with high-end monitors and design software she'd only dreamed of using. The rebranding project was challenging in the best possible way. Marcus's company specialized in AI-driven productivity tools, and he wanted the visual identity to reflect innovation while remaining approachable. Melissa threw herself into the work, creating mood boards and initial concepts that captured the delicate balance between cutting-edge technology and human-centered design. What surprised her most was how little she actually saw Marcus during work hours. He'd meant what he said about professional boundaries. Their interactions were limited to scheduled review meetings and the occasional passing encounter in the hallway. When they did meet to discuss the project, he was all business, asking thoughtful questions and providing constructive feedback without any personal undertones. It was during these professional interactions that Melissa began to see the businessman Marcus had become. He was decisive but collaborative, demanding but fair. His team clearly respected him, and she noticed how he remembered details about their personal lives, asking about someone's sick parent or congratulating another on their engagement. Ambitious college student had evolved into a leader who understood that success meant lifting others up. The personal side of their renewed relationship developed more slowly. Marcus had been true to his word about taking things carefully, never pushing for more than Melissa was ready to give. They'd established a routine of sorts: dinner twice a week, sometimes just the 3 of them, sometimes joined by Sarah Chun, the project manager who'd become something of a friend to Melissa. Emma was flourishing with the increased stability. Starting preschool had been a game changer for her social development, and she came home each day bursting with stories about her new friends and the things she'd learned. She'd also grown comfortable with Marcus's presence in their lives, though. She maintained the 3-year-old's natural skepticism about adult promises. "Marcus," she announced one evening over pizza, "are you going to disappear like Daddy did?" The question hung in the air like a bomb, and Melissa felt her chest tighten. She'd been dreading this moment, knowing that Emma's abandonment issues ran deeper than her cheerful exterior suggested. Marcus set down his slice of pizza and looked directly at Emma, his expression serious. "I hope not, Emma. I really don't want to disappear." But I understand why you'd be worried about that. Daddy said he'd always be here too. I know, and I'm sorry that he broke that promise. That wasn't okay. Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. Mrs. Patterson says some people are keepers and some people are leavers. Which one are you? I want to be a keeper, Marcus said carefully. But I think only time will tell for sure. Melissa was grateful for his honesty. He could have made promises he might not be able to keep, could have tried to win Emma over with grand gestures. Instead, he treated her concerns with the respect they deserved. Later that evening, after Emma was asleep, they sat on Melissa's small balcony, sharing a bottle of wine Marcus had brought. The city sparkled below them, and for the first time since David had left, Melissa felt something approaching peace. You handled that well tonight, she said. The thing with Emma. She's smart. She deserves honest answers. David used to get frustrated when she asked difficult questions. He said she was too serious for a 3-year-old. Marcus turned to look at her. You've never really told me what happened with him. With your marriage. Melissa was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in her glass. We met at a gallery opening about 4 years ago. He was charming, successful. He owned a small marketing firm. I was working freelance, barely making ends meet, and he seemed so stable. She paused, remembering those early days when David's attention had felt like salvation. He pursued me hard. Flowers, expensive dinners, weekend trips. I thought I'd finally found someone who could give me the life I wanted. We got married 6 months after we met. That's fast. Too fast, obviously. I got pregnant with Emma right away, and suddenly David wasn't so interested in the responsibility of being a husband and father. He started working late, going out with clients, finding excuses to be anywhere but home. Marcus listened without judgment, letting her tell the story at her own pace. The worst part was how he made me feel like it was my fault. Like I wasn't interesting enough to keep his attention. Like Emma was a burden instead of a gift. By the time I realized how unhappy we both were, I was financially dependent on him and terrified of being a single mother. What finally made you leave? I didn't leave. He did. Her voice carried old pain. I came home one day and found a note saying he'd emptied our accounts and filed for divorce. He said he needed to find himself, that marriage and fatherhood weren't what he'd expected. Marcus's jaw tightened. What kind of man abandons his child? The kind who should never have become a father in the first place. Melissa took a sip of wine. The irony is that leaving was the best thing he could have done for Emma. She's better off without someone who saw her as an obligation. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights of boats moving across the bay. Finally, Marcus spoke. I need you to know something about why I really took that job in California 7 years ago. Melissa felt her stomach tighten. Marcus, we don't need to. Yes, we do. Because I've let you believe it was about ambition, about choosing my career over you. But that wasn't the whole truth. He set down his wine glass and turned to face her fully. My father called me the night before I was supposed to give them my answer. He told me that my mother's medical bills had wiped out their savings, that they were going to lose the house unless I could help them. Melissa's breath caught. She remembered Marcus's parents' kind, hard-working people who'd sacrificed everything to put him through college. The California job paid 3 times what I could make anywhere else. It was the only way I could save their home and still have enough to pay off my student loans. But I was too proud to tell you that. I wanted you to think I was choosing success, not admitting that my family was broke. Marcus ... Melissa felt tears burning her eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was 21 and stupid, and I thought you'd see my family's financial problems as a burden. Because I was afraid you'd stay with me out of pity instead of love. So you let me think you were abandoning me for money and prestige. I thought it would be easier for you to hate me than to feel trapped by circumstances neither of us could control. Melissa stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the small balcony. 7 years of resentment suddenly felt unmoored, like furniture shifting in an earthquake. You should have told me. We could have figured it out together. How? You had graduate. School, your art, your whole future mapped out in Chicago. I couldn't ask you to give that up for my family's problems. That should have been my choice to make. Marcus stood too, moving closer but not touching her. You're right. I was wrong to make that decision for both of us. But Melissa, I was scared. Scared of failing my parents. Scared of holding you back. Scared of not being enough for you. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Do you have any idea how much damage you did? How long it took me to trust anyone again after you left? I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. They stood there in the cool night air. 7 years of misunderstanding hanging between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Finally, Melissa spoke. Your parents, are they okay now? They're fine. The house is paid off. They have good health care. They're even talking about traveling in retirement. But it cost us 7 years, Melissa. 7 years we could have had together. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. We can't get those years back. No, we can't. But maybe we can stop letting them define what comes next. Melissa looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the successful businessman or the boy who'd broken her heart, but someone who'd made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. Someone who'd carried guilt and regret for as long as she'd carried anger and resentment. I need time to process this, she said quietly. Of course. Take all the time you need. As Marcus prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Melissa? I know. This doesn't change anything, but I need you to know not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted how I handled things. Not one day. After he left, Melissa sat alone on her balcony, trying to reconcile the story she'd told herself for 7 years with this new version of events. Marcus hadn't abandoned her for success. He'd sacrificed their relationship to save his family. It didn't make the pain any less real, but it changed the meaning of everything that had come after Dot inside. Emma slept peacefully, unaware that her mother's understanding of the past was shifting like sand beneath her feet. For the first time since Marcus had walked back into their lives, Melissa began to wonder if some mistakes were forgivable after all. 3 months after Marcus's revelation about his parents, the design project was nearing completion. The new branding for web technologies had exceeded everyone's expectations, modern yet approachable, innovative yet grounded. More importantly, the professional success had given Melissa something she'd lost years ago: confidence in her abilities and her worth. The presentation to the board was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in December. Melissa stood in the conference room, watching snow fall against the windows while executives filed in to review her work. Marcus entered last, offering her an encouraging nod before taking his seat at the head of the table. As she walked them through each element of the rebrand, the logo evolution, color palette, website mock-ups, and marketing materials, Melissa felt the old rush of creative fulfillment. This was what she was meant to do, what made her feel most like herself. The core concept, she explained, clicking to her final slide, is connection. Technology that doesn't isolate us, but brings us together. Innovation that serves humanity rather than replacing it. The room was quiet for a moment before the CFO spoke up. This is exactly what we needed. It's sophisticated without being cold. Cutting edge without being intimidating. Marcus smiled, and Melissa caught the pride in his expression. I think we can all agree this has been an exceptional project. Melissa, thank you for bringing our vision to life. After the meeting, as the executives filed out discussing implementation timelines, Marcus lingered behind. That was incredible, he said. You've outdone yourself. It felt good to do this kind of work again. Real work, meaningful work. I have something to ask you, Marcus said, his tone shifting to something more serious. The board loved your presentation so much that they want to offer you a permanent position. Creative director, full benefits, substantial salary increase. Melissa felt her heart skip. A permanent job at Web Technologies would solve all her financial worries, would give Emma the stability she deserved. But it would also mean working for Marcus indefinitely, blurring the lines they'd tried so hard to maintain. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course. But Melissa, this isn't charity or manipulation. This is a legitimate offer based on your talent and the quality of your work. The board made this decision independent of my personal feelings." That evening, Melissa picked up Emma from her after-school program to find her daughter buzzing with excitement about the upcoming winter pageant. As they walked home through the lightly falling snow, Emma chattered about her costume and the song she'd learned. "Will Marcus come to my show?" Emma asked as they climbed the stairs to their apartment. "I don't know, sweetheart." "Would you like him to?" Emma considered this seriously. "Yes, he promised he wouldn't disappear, and people who don't disappear come to important things." The simple logic of a 3-year-old cut straight to the heart of it. Over the past few months, Marcus had consistently shown up for dinners, for playground visits, for bedtime stories when Melissa was overwhelmed with work. He'd kept his word about being a keeper, not a leaver. That night after Emma was asleep, Melissa called her sister Rachel in Portland. Rachel was the only family member who'd known about Marcus in college, who understood the significance of his return to their lives. "So let me get this straight," Rachel said after Melissa explained everything. "The love of your life came back, offered you your dream job, and has been nothing but patient and understanding with both you and Emma. And you're calling me because I'm terrified." "Of what exactly?" Melissa curled up on her couch holding the phone close. "Of believing this is real, of letting Emma get too attached, trusting that this time will be different. Mel, you've been through hell with David. Marcus isn't David. From everything you've told me, he's proven that over and over again. But what if the sun doesn't rise tomorrow? What if aliens invade? What if you win the lottery?" Rachel's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't live your life based on worst-case scenarios. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith." After hanging up, Melissa stood at her window, looking out at the snowy street. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Emma's pageant is tomorrow at 7, right? I wouldn't miss it." He'd remembered without being reminded, had already planned to be there because it mattered to Emma. The gesture was small, but significant, exactly the kind of consistent reliability that David had never provided. The next evening, the elementary school auditorium was packed with proud parents and relatives. Melissa spotted Marcus in the third row, looking slightly out of place in his business suit among the casual family crowd. When he saw her, he waved and pointed to the seat he'd saved beside him. "I brought flowers," he said as she sat down, gesturing to a small bouquet of daisies, Emma's favorites. "And I may have stopped by the gift shop for a certain unicorn," Melissa laughed. "She's going to lose her mind with excitement." The pageant was a delightful chaos of young children singing seasonal songs with varying degrees of success. When Emma's class took the stage for Jingle Bells, she spotted Marcus in the audience and waved so enthusiastically she nearly fell off the risers. After the show, Emma ran to them with her face glowing. "Did you see me? Did you see how I remembered all the words?" "You were amazing," Marcus said, kneeling down to her level. "The best singer up there." Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Melissa watched something shift in Marcus's expression. The careful distance he'd maintained, the professional boundaries, the guarded optimism, all of it melted away as he hugged this little girl who'd somehow worked her way into his heart. "I have something for you," he said, producing the small stuffed unicorn from behind his back. Emma's eyes went wide. "She's beautiful. What's her name?" "That's for you to decide." "Hope," Emma said immediately. "Her name is Hope." Melissa felt tears spring to her eyes at the unintentional symbolism. Marcus looked up at her over Emma's head, and she saw her own emotions reflected in his expression. Later, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching Hope the unicorn, Melissa and Marcus sat in her kitchen sharing leftover cookies from the pageant reception. "I've made a decision about the job," Melissa said. Marcus set down his cookie, his expression carefully neutral. "Okay, I'm going to take it, but I want to set some ground rules. Whatever you need. If this thing between us doesn't work out, if we try dating and it falls apart, I want your word that it won't affect my job. That you won't make things difficult for me professionally. You have my word. But Melissa, I need you to know something. This isn't about trying anymore. This is about accepting what's already happened." "What do you mean?" Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "I mean, I'm already in love with you. Again, still I'm not sure it ever stopped. And I'm in love with Emma, with the life you've built, with the person you've become. This isn't an experiment for me. This is me asking you to build a future together." Melissa felt her walls, the ones she'd spent years constructing, finally crumble completely. Marcus ... I know it's scary. I know I have to earn back your trust. But I'm not 21 anymore, and I'm not going anywhere. I want to wake up every morning knowing that you and Emma are part of my life. I want to help her with homework and teach her to drive and embarrass her boyfriends when she's older. You really want all that? The chaos, the responsibility, the ordinary everyday moments? Especially the ordinary everyday moments. Do you know what my life has been like for 7 years? Meetings, deals, acquisitions, expansions. I built everything I thought I wanted, but I forgot to build a life worth living." Melissa looked down at their joined hands, then back at his face. "Emma asked me once if you were a keeper or a leaver. I told her only time would tell. And now? Now I think maybe we've had enough time." Marcus smiled, the same smile that had made her fall in love with him in college. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes to trying. A yes to seeing what we can build together. A yes to believing that second chances are possible." He leaned across the table and kissed her, soft and sure and full of promise. When they broke apart, Melissa realized she wasn't scared anymore. Fear had been replaced by something much more powerful, hope. 6 months later, Marcus found himself back in Romano's pawn shop, but this time for a very different reason. Tony looked up from his paperwork as the bell chimed. "Well, if it isn't the fancy tech guy. What brings you back to my humble establishment?" Marcus approached the counter with a small velvet box in his hand. "I need your help with something, Tony. This ring belonged to someone very special, and I want to make sure it gets back to where it belongs." Tony opened the box and whistled low. The diamond ring inside was exquisite, not Melissa's modest wedding band, but something worthy of the love they'd built together. "This is some serious hardware," Tony said. "You proposing to that young lady who was in here selling her ring? If she have me." Tony grinned. "Son, I've been in this business for 30 years, and I can tell you something about people. That girl loves you. Has since the day you walked into my shop and overpaid for her wedding ring." Marcus smiled, remembering that rainy October afternoon. That had changed everything. "Think she say yes?" "I think you better hope she does, because a woman like that doesn't come along twice in a lifetime." That evening, as snow began to fall outside their apartment, no longer Melissa's apartment, but there's Marcus watched Emma teaching Melissa how to play a game she'd learned at school. The sight of them together, heads bent over the coffee table in concentration, filled him with a contentment he'd never known was possible. "Emma," he said, and both girls looked up. "I have something important to ask your mom, but first I need to ask you something." Emma's eyes went wide with anticipation. "What?" Marcus got down on one knee, pulling out the ring box. "Emma Crawford, would it be okay with you if I asked your mom to marry me? Because I can't imagine my life without either of you in it." Emma's squeal of delight could probably be heard 3 floors down. Yes, yes, yes. Can I help you ask her? Melissa was crying and laughing at the same time, her hands pressed to her mouth. Marcus turned to her, his heart hammering in his chest. Melissa Crawford, I know I messed up 7 years ago. I know I hurt you, and I know trust doesn't come easily. After everything you've been through. But I love you, both of you, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Will you marry me? Say yes, Mommy, Emma Stage whispered. Say yes so we can be a real family. Melissa looked at Marcus, then at Emma, then back at Marcus. In his eyes she saw not just love, but commitment. Not just promises, but the proven track record of someone who'd spent months showing up, day after day, building trust one moment at a time. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger and Emma danced around them cheering, Melissa realized that sometimes the best stories weren't the ones that went according to plan. Sometimes the best stories were the ones that fell apart and came back together, stronger and more beautiful than before. Outside, snow continued to fall on the city where they'd found each other again, where a desperate trip to a pawn shop had led to the kind of love story that proved second chances were worth believing in. And in a small apartment filled with laughter and promises and hope for the future, 3 people who'd found their way home to each other began writing the next chapter of their lives together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.